has been an incredible support here for us creating the Fashion Incubator. But he was like, you got to talk to Jeffrey Banks. You just got to talk to Jeffrey. Tell me again, how did you and Ed meet again?
Ed and I met because, well, first of all, we're both in the same industry. I mean, originally I started in the menswear industry, although I've done women's and I've done kids also. But Ed worked for Perry Ellis. He helped develop Perry Ellis's menswear division. Perry originally started as a women's wear designer, and a year or so into doing women's, he decided to branch out into men's, and Ed came to run the business. Came from Texas to New York to run the business. And that's how we met. Perry and I were great friends. We met exactly at the beginning of both of our careers. I went to Perry's very first show and every show after that. And, you know, was a great cheerleader of his talent and as he was of mine. And then, of course, we've always remained friends and seen each other. But a few years ago, when I did the book bio of Perry, Ed was really instrumental in connecting me with a few people that I'd lost touch with, and he had also had a lot of archival photographs and stuff, which we ended up using in the book, and so he was very helpful in that way.
Wow. You know, Jeffrey, one of the things I really appreciate about you is that your work across this industry has really kind of spanned across all parts of the business. I mean, you're in publishing, you've been in education, you've been working as a designer yourself, doing incredible business, but you've worked with so many of the greats. Can you really tell me, how did you get your start in the fashion industry?
Sure. Well, as a child, I always loved to draw. My mother says I could draw before I could walk. I don't believe her, but that's what she says. And she said I never drew stick figures. They were always recognizable forms. That's a cat, that's a dog, that's a person, that's a house. My father also drew really well too, but he became a cartographer. You know what cartography is? The art of map making. So he did that for the government in Washington, D.C., where I grew up.
Wow.
And my mother, I always say, was the original clothes horse. My mother has exquisite taste. She's 99. She'll be 100 in January.
Amazing.
And she still wears high heels, and she still looks extraordinary. And so I always say she was, the original clothes horse. And I think early on, I realized from a pretty young age that to be an artist and to be successful and be able to make a living is really hard. But if you could take that artistry and turn it into clothing design, you had what I thought of as instant gratification. If you design something and someone likes it and they buy it, you're going to find out fairly quickly whether you're successful or you're not successful. Right. So by the time I was 10, I knew I wanted to be a fashion designer, and I designed my mother's Easter outfit.
Wow.
And even though I didn't know how to sew, I sketched it. I went with my mother to her dressmaker. And my mother sews beautifully, by the way, but she worked full-time for the government, so she didn't have a lot of time to sew. But she had this wonderful dressmaker, Annie, who could make anything from a photograph, from a sketch. And, this bossy little 10-year-old, went to the fittings, picked out the fabrics, didn't know, make the bust higher, make the skirt shorter. And, they listened to me, these two women who knew how to sew, listened to me tell them how to make this dress and matching coat. It was a banana wool jersey coat with princess lines, with asymmetric buttons, jet buttons. And then she had a banana raw silk dress underneath. I told my mother exactly what accessories to wear, what kind of hat, what kind of shoe, what kind of bag. And we walked into church on Easter Sunday, and she got rave reviews, and the die was cast. That was it. There was no turning back from that point. And there was a store in Washington, D.C. called Britches of Georgetown, which was the most exclusive, most expensive men's store in Washington, founded by two men who were advertising, had an advertising agency. and they bought all their clothes in New York because Washington was very staid, very conservative in the 60s. There wasn't a lot of fashion, so people used to say, "Where do you get your clothes?" And they would say, "Oh, New York, New York." So they decided they should open a store. So they opened the store in Washington. I started shopping there from the time I could wear men's clothing, so about 13.
Hmm.
And much to my parents' dismay, because it was the most expensive store in Washington. And I was in there one day after school, one Thursday after school, when I was 15, and the assistant manager came over to me and he says, I think you might be the youngest customer who shops here. How old are you? Like 17, 18? I said, no, I'm 15. He said, 15? And I said, yes. And he proceeded to tell me what he thought was a secret, that they were going to open a second store the following year on Connecticut Avenue, close to the White House. And I said, yeah, I know where you're going to open that store. It's the old Saks Pasternak building, blah, blah, blah. And he said, how did you know that? I said, well, I read the industry newspaper, DNR. And he said, you read DNR? And I said, yeah, I've had a subscription since I was 12. So he said, would you like to come and work for us?
Absolutely.
And he literally said that. That was the next thing out of his mouth. And I said, I would love it. And that Saturday, I started working, selling clothes, never having had a job in my life. And I have
Jeffrey,
to tell you, Nina, it was the most fun I ever had. I
that's
mean, it was
amazing.
just such a joy to wait on people, to help these guys who couldn't put a shirt and tie together to save their life. And then the following week, have their girlfriends or their wives come and say, I don't know what you did, just do it again, because he's never worked so good. So it was, I never looked at it as work, and people always say that if what you do is what you love, it's not work, and that's what it seemed like to me. And so anyway, the following year, the owners of the store told Ralph Lauren that you got to meet this kid, this 16-year-old kid. He knows all about you. He's a huge fan of what you do. Now, you have to remember, Ralph Lauren at that point had only been in business 3 or 4 years. I knew instinctively he was going to be as big as he is now. I knew it. I felt
Just
it.
into
And
that.
I believed in him. I
Wow.
totally believed in him and his vision of clothes. And Britches was one of the first 5 stores in the whole country to carry his clothing.
Wow.
So he was coming down to do a charity fashion show, Valentine's Day. And I had perfect attendance, elementary school, junior high school. And I told my parents, I'm not going to school tomorrow. And you're going to write a note. And they did. And I went to the store, and I had just gotten my driver's license. And the owners of the store said, take the company station wagon and pick him up at the airport, which I did.
You picked up Ralph Lauren from the airport?
I picked him up at the airport, yes. And had a flat tire on the way. Had a flat tire on the way. Flagged someone down to help change it, because I didn't know how to change a tire. Fortunately, we had a spare in the back. But we changed the tire. I got there. Of course, I was like, sweating bullets, because now I'm late to the airport. Fortunately, his plane was late coming in from New York. So that was okay. And we spent the entire weekend that he was in Washington talking about Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire and clothes and all the things that he loved and the things I loved.
Wow.
And he said, what do you want to be when you grow up, basically? Said, I want to be a designer like you. And he said, well, when you come to look at colleges, you call me up. I might have a job for you. Well, that's all I needed to hear. Okay, that kept me going for the next year and a half.
Yes.
And just the thought that he might have a job for me. And so I came the next year at 17 to look at colleges with my mother. And the day after we looked at schools, I went to talk to Ralph. And 2 weeks later, he said, you've got the job. So 3 weeks out of high school, 2 months before I started college, I was working for Ralph Lauren as his second assistant, only the second assistant he'd had. So was great. And
Um,
we continue to have a great relationship. We're still great friends. Um, he invited me to his 50th anniversary gala, fashion show, and dinner. Had me sit at the head of my table. I mean, it was lovely. It's lovely.
that's
He always
wonderful.
called me his other son, which is really really great.
That's amazing. I love the bond that's created over just the passion of,
Mhm.
the industry and creating product that is, stylish and and compelling and connects with the customer. I mean, you've just I love your stories, first of all, Jeffrey. I'm just like, this is amazing. Like, you really just connected with so many amazing people.
Well,
One of the things that I was really, just as I'm kind of shifting into some of your written works, because
mhm,
you've written you have several titles out. You've got
yeah.
the Perry Ellis book, you've got Tartan, you've got,
Mhm.
there's several others, but Norell is the newest one,
It's
right?
the newest book, yeah.
Okay, talk about.
Norell was the book that I wanted to make my second book. The first book I did was Tartan Romancing the Plaid. Since I was a little kid, I've always been obsessed with Scottish tartan plaid. Now, ask me why a black kid from Washington is obsessed with Scotland's national fabric. I wanted to know why. I couldn't figure out why. Why was I so obsessed with it? And then
Mhm.
as I started to explore it, I saw that other people were obsessed with it. I mean, when you go to Korea, they love tartan plaid. When you go to Japan, when you go to Milan, every well-dressed Milanese doctor, lawyer, architect, they have a tartan line raincoat or tartan scarf, and they're not Scottish.
Right.
So, and every book I ever read about tartan, none of it, it was basically how to find your family's clan. It really, they were all the same. And I've got 60 books, and they're all basically identical, but none of them really got to the heart of why all of us in the world are entranced by tartan.
Hmm.
And so I said, I'm going to write a book about it. Now, I didn't know the first thing about writing a book. In fact, I went to Barnes and Noble. I bought a paperback book called How to Write a Book. And, it said,
I love
do a
that.
table of contents and
I might need to borrow
do a
that book.
marketing plan and, all of that kind of stuff. I followed it, I followed it religiously. It took me 5 years to do the book, but it's a coffee table book. It's 288 pages. It
Wow.
weighs 6.5 pounds.
Oh,
It's a
it's
big,
incredible
big book
work.
with gorgeous pictures, but it also has a lot of text and a lot of story, the history of tartan, where it comes from. And we talked to theologians, we talked to psychiatrists, we talked to architects, we talked to composers, we talked to lots of people to get their feeling about why tartan is important and why we relate to it. So,
Mhm.
so that was the first book. I when I finished it, I said, I'll never do another book because it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was successful right away, and it's still in print. Came out
Mhm.
in 2007, and it's still very much in print, still in demand all over the world, which is really the shocking thing
Incredible.
for me. And I wanted my second book to be about Norman Norell. Norman
Mm.
Norell is a great American designer. He was born in 1900 in Noblesville, Indiana. He was born Norman Levinson, Norman David Levinson. His father was Jewish, his mother was Methodist. And he came at 20 years of age, he came to New York to study at Pratt and Parsons School of Design, to study design. And he ended up designing for movies. Now, in the 1920s, all of the movie studios were in New York, in Astoria, Queens, Paramount, and so forth. And so they were all in New York. And he designed at 21 years of age, he designed for Rudolph Valentino in a silent movie called The Sainted Devil. Yeah, at 23 years of age, he designed for Gloria Swanson in a movie called Zaza, which was later remade as a talkie. And then in 1925, the studios moved to California. And he didn't want to go to California. He wanted to stay in New York.
Mhm.
So he ended up going to work for a woman named Hattie Carnegie, who had a ready to wear concern and a store just off of Fifth Avenue, for Park Avenue ladies.
Wow.
When she was an immigrant from Poland, when she got to Ellis Island, the customs people said, what's your name? And she said, who's the richest man in America? And they said, Andrew Carnegie. And she said, that's my last name. So she was a total invention herself. And Norman decided that he needed a more glamorous last name. So he took the Nor from Norman, the L from Levinson, and he added, as he said, an extra L for luck. So he became Norell, Norman Norell. Now, the interesting thing I did when I started doing the research was I found out he never changed his name legally. It was, Norman David Levinson, AKA Norman Norell. But he became very quickly the most famous American designer, starting in the 1930s on his own, and then going right through to 1972 and his death at 72 years of age.
Wow.
He dressed Dinah Shore and Lena Horne and Lauren Bacall and Doris Day and Jacqueline Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. I mean, just all these incredible people, as well as lots and lots of regular customers. And the thing about Norell's clothes, which even as a kid drew me to him and why I wanted to do this book about him, was the clothes were made beautifully. He really understood Paris couture techniques, which he did in ready-to-wear. His clothes were ready-to-wear. You had to go to a store to buy them. He didn't make custom clothes. Even if you were Marilyn Monroe and you ordered a dress in a different color or a different length, he would make it for you, but you had to pay a store. He had it shipped through one of his stores because he said his stores had been loyal to him from day one. So he was not going to have you run the stores by trying to go up wholesale, as it were.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, all of his customers they got an invoice from a store, whether it was Bergdorf's or Baumwitz or whatever. And his clothes had beautiful, everything had silk linings. All the fabrics came from Europe. His buttons were especially made for him. If he did white collars and cuffs on a dress, they were made in Switzerland in linen by nuns. And then they flew the collars and cuffs over to be attached to the dress. And they had, buttons or snaps so that you could remove them to launder them so that they would be, crisp, clean, white. He was probably best known for his sequin dresses, which had the nickname mermaid dresses. Because they fit like a second skin, and they were usually made out of either chiffon or silk jersey. Every sequin was sewn on by hand.
Amazing.
And sewn on in such a way that they were not stitched in the same place. Each sequin was stitched in a different area so that they undulated and moved with the body. And I mean, they were gorgeous.
That's true artistry.
Those dresses, whether they were sequin dresses in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s, if you can find them, which is not easy, but if you can find them, they look brand new. They look as gorgeous. A dress from the 1940s looks, absolutely beautiful. And that's why it's so hard to find, because women won't give them up. They just keep wearing them over and over again. And, and when you do find them, they're thousands of dollars, in vintage stores. I mean, Kristen Davis, who played in Sex and the City, she wore a vintage Norell to the opening of the Sex and the City movie in London.
Wow.
Mrs. Obama wore vintage Norell in 2010 at a Christmas party at the White House. She's only the first lady to ever wear vintage to while she was in the White House.
That's incredible.
So anyway, I wanted to do a book about him because part of the reason I wanted to go to Parsons School of Design, which I did transfer to from Pratt, was because Norell was a critic. Unfortunately, the year that I transferred was the year that he died. But I did get to meet him about a month before he died.
Wow.
He was doing a trunk show at Baumwood Teller, and I ran over and I was sort of hiding behind columns just to see what this revered man looked like. And one of his models, Pat Morey, saw me And she came over and she said, "Would you like to meet Mr. Norell?" And I said, "Yes." She could tell I was a student, and she
Mhm.
brought me over to meet him. He was very shy. I was very shy, but I did get to meet him. And the
That's
interesting thing was when I was doing the research for the book at the New York Times, I found a photograph that was taken about 15 minutes before I met him of
oh my
of
goodness.
Norell with those two models on the floor at Baumwitz that had
Wow.
been published in the Time. So it was like kind of full circle.
I
Of
love
course,
that.
I
I
photo-
kind of got chills when you said that. You're like 15 minutes before you even found an image. That's so cool.
yeah,
In
yeah,
the New York
yeah,
Times.
yeah. And the other really lovely thing, and one of the things that really intrigues me about doing books is doing the research, as I call it, CSI fashion.
Yes,
It's like
yes.
finding out all these things and connecting the dots. And
Hmm.
there was a guy who worked for Norell who ran his sales for a period of 12 years. His name was Max and Max Bernegger. He was a salesman at a embroidery house in Switzerland that still exists. Makes a lot of the embroidery for Chanel and so forth. And Norell was doing business with him because he bought all his fabrics in Europe. And one day he was there shortly after Norell took over owning his company outright, and he was complaining to this 27-year-old kid that he couldn't find anyone to run his company and that it was so hard being the designer and being the business person. And
Hmm.
Max said, "Well, why don't you give me a shot?" And Norell said, "Okay, I'll give you a shot." And Max came over. In the first year, he made Norell financially solvent, and he would put him $1 million in the black. I mean, that's how
Wow.
good he was. So as
Wow.
I was working on the book and reading, finding out a little bit about Max, I was like, "Gee, I wonder if this guy is still alive." And I did my Google search,
Yeah.
and the only thing I could come up with was Max Bernegger, retired oil executive living in Florida. And I said, "I'm going to give it a shot." And I got the phone number and I called and I said, "May I speak to Max Bernegger?" And yeah, this is Max. And I said, "Did you ever work for Norman Norell?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And we started this conversation. We were on the phone like 6 hours.
Whoa.
He was unbelievable. He and his wife, uh, Norell was godfather to their children. Um, he he had saved all these wonderful photographs, personal photographs of Norell, which of course I was able to include in the book.
That's incredible.
And the best the best thing ever about doing this book was when I got the first copy. I FedExed to Max and his wife Loretta in Florida, and I said, I want you to see the very first copy of the book. And they were on two different phone lines, and they got on the phone, and they said, "You brought Norman back to life. You brought Norman back to life." Now,
Mhm.
you know what? Doesn't get any better than that. I mean, the
It
fact that
doesn't.
he trusted me with doing that and thought that I could do it, and then said I accomplished what I set out to do.
That's
That was pretty cool.
incredible. That's the
Pretty
most
cool.
incredible compliment you could get for
Uh,
the body of work and the research and the attention to detail in telling someone's story.
yeah, almost 35, 40 years after Norell died, you
Wow.
know.
Wow.
But I felt it was my sacred duty to do it because I don't want what he did to be lost, you
Right.
know. I think that's kind of what drives me with all of the books that I've done is to I've always loved history, in school. And I don't think that we can go forward in any way, shape, or form, not just in the fashion business, but in any way, shape, or form without knowing the history, where we've come from. I mean,
Right.
my parents were at the March on Washington. I remember it vividly as a 10-year-old boy, and how afraid they were to take my sister and I to that march. And they didn't because they were afraid there would be violence, and look where we are now,
Wow.
so history is always an important part of, I think, everything we do or should be.
Absolutely. Honestly, I just feel so inspired, by, your living out of your purpose. I think that, everyone is uniquely crafted to bring certain things to light and to to connect the dots and to keep the story alive. And thank you. Thank you for embracing that and for helping us to understand more about, really as fashion industry, where we come from and what we've built on and where where it's going, but you're right. We need that history, that anchor,
Yeah.
to really, become
I
scared.
mean, just to tell you another quick story, Willie Smith, the designer Willie
Yes.
Smith was a good friend of mine. And in fact, I was planning to have dinner with him the week we had scheduled it, and he died like the week before we were supposed to do it. Um, and a couple of years ago, the Cooper Hewitt Museum uh, informed me that they were planning to do a retrospective show of Willie. And I said, that's a fantastic idea. I said, you should definitely do that. It's long overdue to have a show done about him. And I said, if there's any way I can help you, let me know. And they said, we're looking for video of his fashion shows. And it was when Willie started, it was the very beginning of doing video for shows. And I knew exactly who to call, who could find the videos. And I found for their exhibition, I found, all these videos for them. And then I said to them, are you doing a book? Because you really should do a book to go along with the show. They said, we were thinking of doing a book. I said, well, let me connect you with my publisher, Rizzoli, because I think that, and sure enough, there is now a book. And thank goodness there is, because the exhibition was supposed to open Friday the 13th
Wow.
of March, the day everything shut down.
Wow.
So thank God there's a book. I mean, hopefully when the museum opens, they will have,
Wow.
they canceled the exhibition, or they canceled the opening. I'm sure the exhibition is still installed, but of course, museums are still closed in New York.
Right.
So, but there is a book, and you can read about him and see, So I've always felt that I've been incredibly lucky in that I got to do what I've always wanted to do, which was to work in the fashion industry and be a designer and make a living out of it and travel the world and go to see the Taj Mahal and Paris and London and all these places, that my parents dreamed about but didn't get a chance to do, until later in life. So I feel it's a responsibility to give back. And if giving back means lecturing to kids in school, if it means writing these books so this history is preserved, I think that's so important. I think that's really a key thing.
Well, we're so fortunate and we're so lucky to have you do that. I mean, you've been an incredible designer in your own right, 20 million in sales globally. I mean, you've Jeffrey Banks Limited, an incredible brand, on your own.
The Morona line that I did in the 80s, we were $150 million a year.
Oh my goodness.
When I started Morona, it was a $7 million a year business. And within 6 months, it was 70 million. And by the end, it was $150 million a year.
That's incredible, Jeffrey. Honestly, like, as a Black woman, it's so powerful to see other Black people in our industry, really making incredible business. And I know that, kind of in the scope of what's been going on, culturally, I think there's been, more attention to elevating voices in the Black community. But as much as you are an icon of American history, you're also an icon of Black history, and not but continually making incredible, impact in our world and what we see. I think being able to know that you're like, oh, I've done that already. I know how to build business. I've already created that. Now I'm doing. I have to tell you, it's personally very, very inspiring to know that you have, you are. It's current. It's now. It's ever evolving.
It's interesting that you say that, Nina, because I'm working on a new project which I can't really talk about right this moment. We'll have to have a second chat.
I would love to do another chat. We'll have to talk about.
We'll have to have a second chat. But what I will tell you is that right now, on everyone's mind, whether they like it or they don't like it, is the subject of Black Lives Matter, is the subject of gender equality, is the
Mhm.
subject of racial inequity. I mean, everyone is talking about it, and everyone is saying, what can I do? What should I say? I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I mean, you can't get away from it, unless you're hiding under a rock.
Right.
And so I'm working on this project that is going to take all of that verbiage, and turn it into apparel. And I'm so excited about it. I can't
Mhm.
get to tell you.
Definitely.
It's going to
That is
involve
a teaser
art.
of
It's going to
teasers.
involve apparel, and I think it's going to, in a very interesting way, it's going to make people talk even more about it and open up worlds of dialogue. And it's not even just going to be apparel. It's going to be home furnishings. It's going to be lots of different things.
That's
So
excellent.
we'll come back. Well, because
We
that'll be a whole
absolutely
separate
will.
discussion.
We have to. Okay, Jeffrey, I can't believe our 30 minutes is already up. This time just flies by. And I just have to say thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you. I love talking to you.
you're seriously a living legend. I mean, you are iconic. You've really shaped the industry that we're a part of. And so thank you so much for joining me. It is genuinely an honor to get a chance to speak with you today.
Thank you. Well, it was an honor to speak with you. I enjoyed every moment of it, and I look forward to meeting you and speaking with you in person very soon.
Thank you. So do I. So, guys, we're going to wrap up here. This has been ACCFI Presents with Jeffrey Banks, talking about the book Norell and his illustrious career in the fashion industry. We can always keep up with you on our social media handles at ACC Fashion Incubator on LinkedIn, Instagram, and our Facebook and Twitter pages, as well as our email list at fashion.incubator@austincc.edu. So feel free to reach out to us there. We'll be giving you updates on all of our programming at the college, as well as what's going on with the Fashion Incubator specifically. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And that is ACCFI Presents.